An award-winning movie is bringing audiences to tears across the country. It captures the story of a jaded American reporter and a team of innocent students as they risk everything to expose the Chinese Communist Party's deadly propaganda. NTD's Juliet Song has more on the big screen release.
More than 10,000 Falun Gong practitioners protested peacefully in Beijing, China.
The movie is based on true events. It follows the story of Wang, a student at a top university in China.
In 1989.
Wang practices Falun Gong, a spiritual meditation discipline that teaches the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. But overnight, Wang finds himself an enemy of the state. That's after Beijing launched a national suppression campaign against the practice. As Beijing ramps up the persecution campaign and turns out propaganda to defame Falun Gong practitioners, Wang meets Daniel, an American reporter struggling to find meaning in his profession. Together, they're faced with a choice: to tell the truth, risking their careers or even lives, or stay silent.
The government is conducting one of the largest scale propaganda campaigns in history. You just want to ignore it.
What are you going to do? Walk into the prison and demand to see him?
Get out of China. Expose their lies to the world.
In Delaware, State Senator Dave Lawson gave his take on the film.
Shocked, amazed, certainly felt that I was way behind in what was going on when this started in 1999, and now 23 years later, this is now just coming out. I'm embarrassed I didn't know more.
In Los Angeles, one moviegoer says she had to hold back tears.
All these people that are being persecuted and are victims in China and anywhere else under a totalitarian regime, we just want to let them know that we are going to be praying for them.
Another audience member says even though the movie made him sad about rights abuses happening in China,
I think it was also the mission of the film is to make you feel somewhat hopeful that there is redemption, that at the end of the day there is some hope if we fight for what's right.
He says he hopes more people can build their courage and stand up for what's right.
I really hope that they find it in themselves, like that character who's willing to sacrifice his family, his child, his wife, in order to stand up for what's right. That's a very difficult choice to make. It's much more comfortable to stay where you are and to be silent and to continue to do what you do and just go along with the story. But to find it in yourself, to stand up and do what's right, we all have to do that.
Adding that if people are willing to speak out, they can make a change. The movie is premiering in 30 cities from the east to west coast. That includes New York, Washington, D.C., and California.
U.S. diplomatic staff inside China are making a request to the State Department to let them and their families leave the country. CNN cited sources familiar with the matter, saying the request for an authorized departure was made amid growing concerns about China's strict pandemic containment measures. The term authorized departure doesn't refer to a formal order. Instead, it gives diplomats, their families, and their staff the option to stay out of China until they feel it's safe to return. Sources said this request has not yet been approved. Responding to NTD's request for comment, the State Department said the status of the U.S. mission in China has not changed. A spokesperson also added that any potential changes will be based on the health, safety, and security of State Department employees and their family members. On the other hand, Chinese state-controlled media have denounced the U.S. request. One outlet, the Global Times newspaper, called it a dirty trick. The request was reportedly driven by fear of tightening pandemic protocols in recent months, including some measures that could separate parents and children. Currently, the U.S. diplomatic mission in China has an agreement with China's foreign ministry that parents will remain with their children in case of quarantine. But U.S. diplomats worry that China's health agency could potentially reverse that deal. A Chinese diplomat is accusing the U.S. of inflicting pain on children in Afghanistan, but the photos are fake. The diplomat is China's foreign ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian. Posting a series of photos on Twitter, Zhao wrote, "After 20 years' war, this is what the U.S. has brought to the children in Afghanistan." But the photographer who took the photos is debunking Zhao's claim. In a tweet, the photographer, Ali Haz Suleiman, says the photos were not taken in Afghanistan, but in Idlib, a city in Syria. He adds that this is what the Syrian regime and Russian forces brought to the children in Idlib, not what the United States brought to the children in Afghanistan. The diplomat Zhao Lijian has since deleted his tweet. In the U.S., if you're from a rural area and want to move to a city, the authorities won't stop you. But it's a different story in China.
The Chinese Communist Party says it's the party of the farmers and the working class. In the symbol of communism, the hammer represents workers and the sickle represents farmers. But in the largest communist country in the world today, farmers face one of the most discriminatory systems, specifically China's hukou or residency permit system. The regime put it in place to maintain social stability, but it makes it extremely difficult, if not impossible, for people from rural areas to move to larger cities. Your hukou determines where you're allowed to live. Since around the time the Communist Party took power in China until the 1980s, rural people were forbidden to move to cities. If you were not lucky enough and had rural residency, you were tied to your home village where there could be fewer job opportunities and lower quality education. The restrictions were loosened after China's policy of reform and openness. Hundreds of millions of so-called migrant workers are now allowed to flood into cities to find jobs. But workers from rural areas are still treated as secondary citizens in cities. In some cases, their conditions in their own country are similar to or even worse than illegal immigrants in some sanctuary cities or countries outside China. The farmers-turned-workers often don't get proper labor contracts. They have to work longer hours under poor conditions, pay much more if they get sick and go to the hospital because they don't have equal access to healthcare as city residents. And their kids can't go to local public schools. So they either have to go to extremely expensive but low-quality private schools or go back to their hometown for school without their parents to take care of them. Over the past decade or so, the communist regime has repeatedly vowed to reform the hukou system. Some smaller Chinese cities have eased restrictions, but none of the larger cities have. In Beijing, for example, over a third of the population are migrant workers. Due to the city's high property and rent prices, many people live in basements, dangerous buildings, or even makeshift homes. In 2017, a fire broke out in one of those cramped buildings. 19 people were killed, including 8 children. The city government then started a campaign to drive what they call the low-end population, mostly migrant workers in low-paying service jobs, out of the city. That's by forcibly demolishing their homes, leaving tens of thousands of people homeless overnight. Chinese authorities, meanwhile, tightened control of the internet, banning related discussions. One Beijing photographer told the New York Times that the forced evictions made him think of Holocaust movies, in which Jewish people were expelled without a word of protest from onlookers.
Not made in China seems to be trending in some areas. A South Korean company is trying to sell itself by emphasizing they are not Chinese. South Korea's LG Energy Solution says it is aiming to become the world's largest manufacturer of electric vehicle batteries, dethroning China. And it seems to be a good time to do it. A senior researcher at the Korea Automotive Technology Institute tells the Wall Street Journal that China is having a hard time entering the U.S. and European market because of the ongoing trade war. Meanwhile, LG Energy Solution says it can overtake China because it doesn't rely solely on the Chinese market. Right now, China's contemporary Amperex technology, or CATL, leads as the world's largest maker of EV batteries. That company generates 80% of its revenue from within China, which LG Energy CEO Kyung Soo says is a weakness. He says they have a more diverse client base in the U.S. and Europe. They also have production bases in these regions to supply their clients, which CATL does not have. Kwang says having the lead in terms of more global clients will increase their market share in the future. LG Energy's expansion plans are already underway in 6 countries. That's including an investment of $4.6 billion in a joint factory with General Motors in the U.S. Research company SNE estimates CATL's global market share was around 32% last year, while LG Energy's was second at 21%. A special committee by the European Parliament has been investigating for about 18 months how foreign agents are influencing and subverting EU countries. The director of the French military think tank now says why there's hope for the EU to better understand the threat of Chinese influence operations. This report comes from NTD's France correspondent David Vives.
How the Chinese Communist Party is looking to infiltrate and influence EU countries is increasingly becoming a hot topic for the European Parliament. A EU Special Committee on Foreign Interference and Disinformation has now finalized its inquiry that started 1.5 years ago. The committee has conducted 50 hearings with around 130 experts. It has been investigating the different ways in which foreign agents infringe and subvert democratic processes. The committee has focused on both organizations as well as governmental actors, including China. Jean-Baptiste Jean-Vilmer is the director of the Institute for Strategic Research at French Ministry of the Armed Forces. He mentioned some of the committee's conclusions.
Here are some measures proposed by the committee. Provide financing alternatives to Chinese foreign direct investment, used as a geopolitical tool. So we see they care about the Chinese influence operations. Another point is to ban foreign funding of political parties in Europe.
In September 2021, Vilmer's Institute released a 650-page report on China's influence operation. The report details key strategies by the Chinese Communist Party to project its influence in foreign countries. For example, it mentions direct interference into electoral systems, as in the case of Canada and Australia. Another example documented in the report is how the CCP partners with or sometimes recruits former politicians and invite members of parliament to travel to China. This allows the CCP to get information or intelligence on foreign countries and also open doors for Chinese companies to enter foreign markets.
And also one recommendation by the committee is to make it harder for the CCP to recruit high-level politicians soon after they have retired. In Taiwan, there is a problem with former generals. When these generals retire, they are offered by the Chinese to work for them. They are being paid to provide information on their colleagues in the military who are still on active duty in the country.
The president of the special committee is no other than Raphael Glucksmann, who is a voice against rigorous persecution in China. Jean Vilmer says there is hope that the committee's warning on China's influence will have an impact in future policies. If that is the case, it means the EU Parliament is increasingly becoming an important voice against China's influence. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.